What you're looking at here is the snapshot of pure chaos, a society literally tearing itself apart, hoping to be reborn. This is the story of the French Revolution, a moment in history that completely changed our ideas about power, liberty, and even terror.
Okay, I want you to just imagine being in Paris on July 14th, 1789. The air is thick with rumors and fear. The king has moved troops into the city, and everyone thinks he's about to crush them. So thousands of regular people, shopkeepers, craftsmen, laborers, they decide to do something absolutely incredible. They decide to fight back, and their first stop is a grim, medieval fortress that dominates the city skyline.
And this is where it gets a little strange. The target of this huge, angry crowd was the Bastille prison. But here's the thing, it only held 7 inmates. So why would you risk your life storming a fortress for just 7 guys? Well, the answer has nothing to do with who was inside. It's all about what that building stood for, and the long, long fuse of crisis that was about to set off a massive explosion.
To really get why the Bastille was such a big deal, we have to rewind. We have to look at the society that was about to erupt. Welcome to France's old regime, a kingdom that was, quite frankly, teetering on the edge of total collapse.
So, what exactly was wrong? Well, for starters, when King Louis XVI took the throne back in 1774, he basically inherited an empty bank account. Decades of war, including, ironically, helping fund the American Revolution, had left the country with a mountain of debt. It was so bad, the government was spending a huge part of its budget just on interest payments. So what do? The state did the only thing it could think of, raise taxes on the very people who had nothing left to give.
And this chart right here shows you the fundamental injustice of it all. French society was split into 3 groups, or estates. Now look at this. The first estate, the clergy, and the second estate, the nobility. Together they made up maybe 3% of the population. But they owned most of the land and, get this, paid almost 0 taxes. That meant that the entire financial weight of the kingdom fell on the third estate. And who was that? Oh, just everybody else. 97% of the country.
And if you want to know how that felt, this quote from the time just says it all. The image is so vivid. The nobleman is the spider, the peasant the fly. You can just feel that sense of being trapped, of being slowly drained of everything you have by a system that was designed to do just that.
On top of being broke and feeling cheated, people were literally starving. France was stuck in this terrible loop. First, bad weather would ruin the harvest. That meant there wasn't enough grain to go around. And when something's scarce, what happens? The price skyrockets. We're talking about bread here, the main thing the poor relied on to survive. When you can't even afford a loaf of bread, you get desperate. And desperate, hungry people, they riot.
So you have this population that's angry, hungry, and broke. And right into that combustible mix, you throw in some powerful new ideas. This was the peak of the Enlightenment. Thinkers like Rousseau were asking radical questions, like, hey, maybe the government should work for the people, not the other way around. Or maybe you shouldn't get special treatment just because of who your father was. These ideas of liberty and equality gave people a language for their anger and a vision for a completely different future.
So, you've got the anger, you've got the hunger, and now you've got the ideas. In this next part, we're going to see what happens when those things collide, and the people decide it's time to take power for themselves.
I mean, just look at how fast everything happened in 1789. It's breathtaking. In May, the king calls a meeting. By late June, the Third Estate has basically said, we're done with this, and formed their own government. Less than a month later, the Bastille falls. And by August, the entire 1,000-year-old feudal system is dismantled. In a single night, the world was literally changing by the hour.
And you really have to appreciate how radical this National Assembly was. This was a total game changer. For the first time, it wasn't the king calling the shots, it was the representatives of the people. And they were claiming the authority to write a constitution and put limits on the king's power. The very center of gravity in France had just shifted.
And one of their first, most important acts was issuing the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. This document declared that rights like free speech and equality weren't gifts from a king. They were natural and inalienable. That means you are born with them, and no government on earth has the right to take them away. This was a philosophical bombshell that would inspire democratic movements for centuries to come.
But as you can probably guess, the path from these incredible ideals to a new reality was not going to be a smooth one. In fact, the fight for liberty was about to get very, very dark and descend into one of the most violent periods in modern history.
And right away, you could start to see the cracks. The Declaration talked about the rights of man. But what about women?
The playwright Olympe de Gouges pointed this out pretty forcefully. She wrote her own version, the Declaration of the Rights of Woman, basically saying, hey, these rights are great, but you've managed to leave out half the population. It was a powerful reminder that even revolutionaries could have blind spots.
Things kept getting more and more radical. By September 1792, the government took the final step. They didn't just limit the monarchy, they abolished it completely. For the first time, France was officially a republic. And just to make sure everyone understood there was no going back, 4 months later, they put citizen Louis Capet, the man who used to be King Louis XVI, on trial for treason. He was found guilty and publicly executed by guillotine. They didn't just get rid of the king, they literally cut off the head of the old order. This event kicked off the most infamous phase of the revolution, the Reign of Terror. Under the leadership of a radical named Maximilien Robespierre, the government basically declared war on its own citizens. The idea was that to protect the new republic, you had to eliminate all its enemies. And an enemy could be anyone, a noble, a priest, or even a fellow revolutionary you just didn't think was radical enough. Thousands were arrested and sent to the guillotine.
How could they possibly justify this madness? Well, Robespierre himself explained it. In his mind, this wasn't murder. He actually called terror justice, swift, severe, and inflexible. He argued that it was a necessary and even virtuous tool you had to use to defend liberty. It's a chilling piece of logic.
But not everyone was on board. Some revolutionaries, like Camille Desmoulins, saw the insane flaw in this logic. He argued that you can't build a society of liberty on a foundation of fear. And he asked this haunting question: for every one person you execute, aren't you just creating 10 new enemies among their family and friends? For his common sense and moderation, he too was sent to the guillotine. So, after all this chaos and bloodshed, where did France end up? Let's take a look at what happened after the Terror and what the revolution's incredible, complicated legacy really is.
Well, in the end, the Terror just burned itself out. Robespierre's hunt for enemies made everyone so paranoid that nobody felt safe, so his own allies turned on him before he could turn on them. In a moment of perfect, bloody irony, the man who perfected the Terror was himself sent to the guillotine. And with that, the Reign of Terror was over.
What came next was a long period of instability. There was a weak and corrupt government that nobody trusted, which created a massive power vacuum. And into that vacuum stepped a brilliant, ambitious, and ruthless young general, Napoleon Bonaparte. He promised stability, and he delivered, by seizing total power and eventually crowning himself emperor. The revolution against a king had led to an emperor.
Now, it's easy to look at that and call the whole thing a failure, but that's not the whole story. Because you can't kill an idea, and the ideas of the French Revolution, liberty, equality, fraternity, they couldn't be put back in the box. They spread across the globe, inspiring countless movements for democracy and human rights. They really are the foundation of our modern world.
And that leaves us with the revolution's biggest, most timeless question. It's a story that began with a beautiful cry for freedom and ended with a terrifying bloodbath, all in the name of the people. And it forces us to ask a question that's just as important today as it was then. When you fight for a better world, how do you stop yourself from becoming the very tyrant you're trying to defeat?